I was halfway through a 600-mile haul, cruising through the night on an empty stretch of highway. The road seemed endless, just me and the hum of my truck, the headlights barely cutting through the dark. The wind outside had picked up, and it made the rig sway slightly, but I was used to it. I've been driving trucks for over a decade, and I've seen it all: rain, snow, blizzards, fog so thick you could cut it with a knife. But this was different. I pulled into a gas station near a desolate exit just after 2 a.m. The station was closed, lights flickering in the cold breeze. I'd been driving for over 8 hours straight, and my eyes were starting to play tricks on me. It was the kind of place you'd expect in a horror film, the kind of stop you regret making. But I needed to fill up, and my eyes were heavy. I walked inside the small convenience store. The lights buzzed above my head, and the store felt abandoned. The clerk's desk was empty. Strange, I thought. The door had a sign saying they were open 24/7, but there was no one around. I filled my truck up, grabbed a couple of energy drinks, and headed back to the rig. As I climbed back into the cab, something caught my eye. There was a man standing in the distance by the edge of the lot, near the tree line. His figure was barely visible, just a shadow in the dark, almost as if he was waiting for something, or someone. Now, I'm not the type to be spooked easily. I've driven through some of the roughest, loneliest roads in the country, and I've learned to ignore the strange and the weird. But there was something about this guy. His stillness. His presence. He wasn't moving, not even an inch. I shook it off and started the engine, telling myself it was probably just another trucker taking a break, but the feeling in my gut wasn't going away. As I rolled out of the station, I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time. He was still standing there. Watching. It wasn't until I hit the highway that things started to get weird. I saw headlights in my rearview mirror, but they didn't seem to be coming from another vehicle. It was like someone was tailing me, keeping the exact same speed, staying just out of sight. I increased my speed, but the headlights matched me, staying 100 yards behind. My heart started to race. I thought, maybe it was just another trucker trying to pass, but no one was overtaking me. The truck behind me was following me, but there was no way for it to pass. Then, the radio static kicked in. It was loud, screeching, making my ears ring. Then, out of the chaos, a voice came through. "Don't stop." The voice was calm. Cold. It wasn't a normal radio transmission, it wasn't like any trucker I had ever heard before. And it didn't sound like anyone I knew. I glanced nervously at the mirror again. The headlights were still there. And that's when I saw it. The figure. In the passenger seat of the truck behind me. He was sitting there, staring right at me. His face was pale, unnaturally pale, and his eyes, they weren't human. They were wide, almost too wide, like they were straining to see me. He didn't move, didn't blink. Just stared. My stomach dropped. I slammed on the brakes, hoping the truck behind me would finally get the message and pass, but instead, the truck seemed to slow down with me. As I came to a complete stop, the truck stopped too. The figure in the passenger seat never moved, just continued to stare. I wasn't sure what to do. I reached for my phone, but then the radio crackled again, and the voice came through, smoother this time, more sinister. "Keep driving, if you want to stay alive." I didn't wait for a second warning. I floored the gas pedal, and this time, the headlights disappeared. The figure was gone. Just like that. I drove for what felt like hours, but the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. There was something, or someone, out there, watching me. I couldn't tell you why, but the feeling stayed with me. Finally, just before dawn, I saw a rest stop up ahead. I didn't think, didn't care, I just needed to get out of the truck. I pulled over, grabbed my things, and got out. My legs were shaky, my head spinning. And that's when I saw the man again. He was standing at the edge of the rest stop parking lot, under the flickering light of a broken street lamp. He wasn't even looking at me this time. He was staring into the trees, as if waiting for something. As I walked past him, I heard him mutter something under his breath. It was barely audible, but I could swear he said, "You shouldn't have looked." I didn't stop to ask him what he meant. I wasn't about to make the same mistake twice. As I made my way into the small diner to grab some coffee, I couldn't help but glance out the window. The man was gone. Vanished. Just like the truck. But my stomach still churned with the fear that the nightmare wasn't over. I tried to shake off the feeling as I sat at the counter, sipping my coffee. The warmth of it helped clear my head a little, but not enough to forget what had happened. I tried to tell myself it was just a weird coincidence, that I was tired, or maybe I had hallucinated the whole thing. But deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong. Something had been watching me. And I wasn't sure if it had followed me or if it was waiting for me. The old diner was practically empty, save for a couple of truckers who didn't seem to notice me. I figured they were regulars, just like the waitress who refilled my cup and didn't say a word. There was an eerie stillness to the place. I couldn't help but feel like I was the only one not supposed to be there. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stop, where everyone was just stuck. I finished my coffee, and I decided to get back on the road. It was still dark outside, the sky just beginning to hint at the first light of dawn, but I had miles to go. It was stupid to stay in one place for too long. The sooner I got back on the road, the better. As I walked back to my truck, I glanced at the lot one more time. My eyes instinctively went to the edge of the parking lot, near the trees. That's when I saw him again. The man. Standing there. He wasn't moving. He was just standing in the same spot as before, staring at me. But this time, his eyes weren't wide. They were closed. He was just standing there, his hands at his sides, as if waiting for something. Or someone. I froze. My heart raced. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. This was happening again. I turned away, quickly getting into my truck and slamming the door behind me. My hands shook as I started the engine, but I wasn't going to wait around. Not for him. Not for whatever he was. I hit the gas pedal, and the truck lurched forward. But before I could even get my bearings, something else caught my attention. The road stretched ahead, endless, but now I could see another set of headlights in my rearview mirror. They weren't far behind, not like last time, but they were there. Another truck, keeping pace with me. Almost too closely. No matter how much I sped up, it stayed right behind me, the headlights as bright as ever. I couldn't make out the truck's make or model, it was too dark, but the shadow behind the headlights seemed off. It was too large, too imposing. It felt like it was more than just another trucker on the road. I kept my eyes on the road, but the feeling of being chased, being hunted, grew stronger with every passing mile. The truck stayed with me, like a predator keeping its distance, waiting for the right moment. As I passed through small towns and then hit another stretch of highway, things started to get even stranger. I could feel something in the air, like the temperature had dropped suddenly. The kind of cold that sinks deep into your bones. I checked my dashboard to see if the AC had kicked on, but it wasn't that. It was a chill I couldn't explain, a sense of dread creeping up on me. I decided to pull over, hoping to clear my head. I needed to figure out what was going on. But as I slowed down and steered toward the side of the road, the truck behind me did the same. It was like a game now. I got out of my rig, pacing back and forth. I wasn't sure what to do, but I couldn't just keep driving blindly. I needed to confront this. The truck behind me stopped too. The headlights shut off, but the truck stayed in place. There was no sound, nothing. I walked a little farther, trying to gather the courage to turn around, but something stopped me. A feeling, a presence. I didn't need to turn around. I could feel him. The man. Standing somewhere in the dark, just beyond the reach of my headlights. That's when I heard it. A whisper. Coming from behind me. Get in the truck. I spun around, my heart pounding. But there was no one there. Only darkness. I didn't waste another second. I jumped back into the cab of my truck, slamming the door. I couldn't look behind me. I didn't want to know. I floored the gas pedal again, pushing the truck into overdrive. But it wasn't fast enough. The truck followed. No matter how fast I drove, how many miles I put between us, it was always there. The headlights. That ever-present, looming shadow. Hours passed. Days, it felt like, though I knew it had only been a few minutes. I stopped at every gas station, hoping to get some relief, but the truck would always be there when I got back on the road. I couldn't escape. It was like I was caught in some kind of endless loop. Then, just as I was starting to lose all hope, I saw a sign, one of those signs for a small town I'd passed through before. The Road to Nowhere. I didn't recognize the name, but I didn't care. I had to stop. I had to do something. I made a sharp turn, heading toward the town. The truck behind me followed, just as it always had, but when I took the turn, the truck didn't. I pulled into the town, the headlights now gone. But as I rolled through the quiet streets, I realized something. The man was gone. The truck was gone. And in its place, nothing. I wasn't sure if it was a trick of the mind, or if I had finally outrun whatever was following me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, waiting for me. Watching. I parked in a deserted lot, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the truck. The cold air hit my face, sharp and biting. And that's when I noticed the sign for the diner up ahead. A small, faded sign. It looked old, run down, and almost as if it had been abandoned for years. But there was one thing that stopped me from walking toward it. The man. He was standing right in front of the diner. And his eyes, they were wide open again. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The man was standing right there, just a few feet away from me, under the flickering streetlight. His eyes weren't just wide, they were empty. Hollow. Like they were waiting for something to happen, like they were waiting for me. The cold air pressed against my skin, but it wasn't just the temperature. It was something deeper, something that wrapped itself around me like a suffocating fog. Every step I took toward him felt like a mistake, but I couldn't stop moving. My legs were carrying me forward as if I was being drawn by some invisible force, against my will. I tried to look away, but his eyes, they pulled me in. I couldn't break free. I wanted to shout, to turn and run back to my truck, but I couldn't make a sound. My throat was tight, and my body felt heavy, like it was filled with lead. The closer I got, the more I noticed. His clothes were old, worn, like he'd been standing there for a lifetime. His face was pale, so pale that it looked almost unnatural. His skin was stretched tight over his bones, and his mouth barely moved when he spoke. When he did, his voice was slow, almost lazy, as though it had come from somewhere far, far away. "You're not supposed to be here," he whispered, his words hanging in the air like a curse. "You never were." I backed away, my mind screaming for me to run, but my legs wouldn't listen. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to escape. Every part of me told me to turn around, but every part of me knew that if I did, I wouldn't make it. I finally managed to rip my eyes away from his. I turned quickly, too quickly, and ran back to my truck. I could hear my feet pounding against the pavement, but it felt like it was all happening in slow motion. The sound of my breathing filled my ears, and I could feel my heart trying to burst out of my chest. When I reached my truck, I didn't hesitate. I jumped inside and slammed the door shut, locking it. I stared out the windshield, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I couldn't shake the image of the man, still standing there in the shadows, watching me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, trying to figure out what to do next. My mind was racing, too many thoughts at once. Should I call the cops? Should I go back to the diner and get some answers? But before I could make a decision, I glanced in my rearview mirror. And there it was. The truck. The same one from before. It had followed me. Again. It was parked just behind my rig. But there was no driver inside. The truck was empty. The lights were off, but I could still see the silhouette of the cabin in the dark, the same shadowy figure I'd seen earlier. This time, though, the figure wasn't standing by the trees. It was sitting in the driver's seat. And the worst part? It was looking directly at me. I could see his face now, fully. He didn't look human anymore. His features were contorted, twisted, as if they had been stretched beyond recognition. His mouth was open wide, as if trying to speak, but no words came out. I didn't wait. I floored the gas pedal, and the truck jerked forward, speeding down the empty streets. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there. I couldn't stay in that place. But no matter how fast I drove, no matter how many turns I made, the truck was still behind me. It was like it was following me, always just a few yards back, never getting any closer, but never getting any farther away either. I glanced in the rearview mirror again. The figure was gone. Vanished. But the truck was still there, trailing behind me in the dark. And that's when I realized the truth. I wasn't being chased anymore. I was being followed. I kept driving. Miles passed. Hours, it felt like. I wasn't sure if I was even still on the same road anymore. The world outside had gone completely dark, and I couldn't tell if I was dreaming or if this was real. Eventually, I saw a sign. A small, nondescript town up ahead. I pulled off the highway, trying to make sense of what was happening. Maybe I could stop at a diner, get a cup of coffee, and figure this out. But as I rolled into the town, I saw something I hadn't expected. The truck. It was there too. In the town. But it wasn't just one. It was everywhere. Trucks lined the streets, parked in empty lots, tucked into shadowy corners. And as I drove past each one, I saw the same thing. The same figure. Sitting in the driver's seat. They were all the same man. And he was staring at me. Suddenly, the headlights of my truck flickered, and I felt a jolt as if something was pulling at my rig. The engine sputtered. My hands went numb. The truck started to slow down, even though I was pressing the gas pedal as hard as I could. And that's when I heard it. A voice. Coming from the truck's radio. "Turn it off," it said. "Turn it off, before it's too late." I didn't think. I just reached for the radio dial and turned it off. The static stopped. But the feeling didn't. The eyes were still there. Watching me. The trucks weren't following me anymore. They had surrounded me. And somewhere, in the distance, I could hear the sound of an engine starting up. And I knew, deep in my bones, that I wasn't going to make it out of here. The silence in the truck cab was deafening. I sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were turning white. The headlights of my rig were still on, but they barely cut through the darkness anymore. The town was empty, eerily empty. The streets were lined with the same old trucks, each one parked in perfect silence. But their drivers weren't just staring at me from the windows anymore. They were, waiting. Watching. I couldn't escape them. It didn't matter how many times I pressed the gas pedal. The truck, now moving slower than I'd ever experienced, seemed to be tethered to the place, stuck in a loop I couldn't break. I slammed my fist on the steering wheel. What the hell was happening? I thought about the diner. Maybe there was something there, something I missed. Maybe someone had answers. But as soon as the thought crossed my mind, the truck lurched forward. I didn't have control anymore. It was as if the road had taken over, pulling me back toward the center of town, back toward the diner. I didn't want to go. I was terrified of what I might find there. But something in me, some instinct, maybe, told me I had no choice. My hands weren't in control anymore. The truck was driving itself. I tried to look out the window, but the buildings blurred by too fast. The trees outside were swaying, and I thought I saw figures moving between them, shadows, maybe. I didn't want to look, but my eyes betrayed me, locking on the figure by the diner. He was standing under the same flickering streetlight. His body was motionless, but his head jerked to the side. His wide, hollow eyes were locked on me, as if he had been waiting for me all along. I couldn't tear my gaze away from him. The truck slowed, and the headlights illuminated the diner's front entrance. I saw the door creak open slowly, and I felt my body freeze in place. "Get out." The voice was calm, almost soothing, like it had all the time in the world. The voice that had spoken to me on the radio. I could feel its presence in my head. The words weren't spoken out loud. They were inside my mind. The voice was becoming part of me, echoing, pushing, controlling. It was trying to force me into submission. I knew I had to get out. I couldn't just sit here and let whatever this was take me. I gripped the door handle, but my hand wouldn't move. The voice in my head kept repeating the same words over and over. "Get out. Get out." I felt the truck come to a stop, and before I knew it, the door had opened. My feet moved without thinking. I was outside now, standing in front of the diner. Everything around me seemed distorted, like the air itself was bending. The streetlight above buzzed as if it was on its last legs. The diner's windows were dark, and I couldn't see anything inside. But there was a sense of dread that gnawed at me, an undeniable urge to go inside, to find the answers I knew I wouldn't want to hear. But I couldn't turn back. I couldn't escape. With a deep breath, I stepped forward. As my feet hit the gravel, the sound of my steps echoed in the emptiness. The air around me felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest. Each step I took toward the door made my pulse race faster. Something wasn't right. I was getting closer to the truth, but I didn't know if I was ready for it. I reached the door and reached for the handle, but just before I could turn it, I heard it. The sound of footsteps. They were behind me. I spun around so fast I almost fell. The man, was standing there, directly behind me. His face was even more distorted than before. His eyes were no longer just wide, they were hollow, empty, like pits that stared into nothingness. His mouth hung open, stretched in a grotesque grin that wasn't human. I tried to back away, but the moment I moved, I heard the voice again. "Open the door." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. And this time, I couldn't resist. I turned the handle. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside. The diner was even darker than the outside, the air heavy with stale grease and old coffee. The floor creaked under my feet, and I could hear the hum of old, broken neon lights flickering in the back. The place was empty. Completely empty. Then, from the back, a figure emerged. At first, I couldn't make it out, the shadows too thick. But as it came closer, I could see him more clearly. It was another man, his face pale, gaunt. His skin was stretched too tight, his features blurred as if the very act of him existing was wrong. But then I recognized him. It was the same man from outside. The one who had been waiting for me. "You shouldn't have come," he said softly, his voice raspy, like it hadn't been used in years. "You were always meant to be here." I couldn't breathe. My body froze in place. The truth was flooding over me, like I was drowning in it. The diner wasn't real. None of this was real. The trucks, the figures, the voice, it was all part of something bigger. I had been trapped here, in this place, in this nightmare. I looked around the diner, searching for an escape, but the door behind me had disappeared. The windows were now blacked out, the air so thick I could barely see my own hands in front of me. The man grinned, revealing sharp, rotting teeth. "Welcome to your new home." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The world around me was collapsing, closing in on itself, and I had nowhere to go. Every thought in my mind screamed for me to run, but my body was frozen, locked in place. The man, no, the thing, was standing in front of me, his grotesque grin widening as if he could sense my fear. His eyes gleamed with a hunger that made my skin crawl, but I couldn't escape. There was no door, no way out. "You can't leave," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction, like he had been waiting for this moment all along. "You belong here now. You're part of the cycle." I stumbled backward, my chest heaving with panic, my heart thudding in my ears. The diner was no longer just a place, it had become a trap. The walls seemed to stretch and bend, and the very air in the room thickened. I looked around frantically, trying to make sense of it, but everything was wrong. The chairs, the tables, the counter, it was all shifting, warping, like a reflection in broken glass. The room felt alive, pulsating with an energy I couldn't understand. I turned to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed with terror. The man's laughter echoed around the diner, louder and louder, until it felt like it was coming from inside my head. He wasn't just laughing at me, he was laughing with me. He knew my fear. He had always known it. "You think you can escape?" he sneered. "There is no escape from this place. From me. From this road." And then, in an instant, everything changed. The diner vanished. The walls dissolved, and I found myself standing back outside, alone in the street again. But it wasn't the same street. The world around me had shifted once more. The road stretched on endlessly, curving and twisting in impossible directions, leading nowhere. I was back on the highway. But it wasn't the same highway. It felt wrong. The asphalt was cracked, the trees beside the road were bent in unnatural angles, and the sky above was a deep, swirling shade of purple. It was like I had stepped into a different dimension, one that didn't obey the laws of time or space. The truck was still there. My truck. It was parked just ahead, the headlights flickering faintly in the dark. I didn't want to get back in. I didn't want to drive. I didn't want to keep going. But the voice, that cold, commanding voice, was back. It whispered in my ear, soft and insistent. "Get in the truck. Keep driving." I couldn't resist. My body moved without my consent, as if the road had already claimed me, as if I had no choice but to follow its path. I climbed into the cab. The engine roared to life as if it had been waiting for me. I slammed the door shut, locking it behind me, but it didn't matter. I could feel it, it was inside the truck with me. The man. The thing. It was there, sitting beside me, its presence suffocating, pressing in from all sides. I could feel its cold eyes on me, watching my every move. I didn't dare look at the passenger seat. I knew it would be empty. But I could feel it, feel him, lurking just behind me, just out of sight. The road stretched on ahead, but no matter how long I drove, no matter how fast I tried to go, the end of the road never came. There was no exit, no sign of civilization. The endless black highway wound through an empty wasteland, twisted and unyielding. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw nothing but darkness. No other cars, no other trucks, just the empty void that stretched behind me. The voice spoke again, this time louder, more demanding. "Keep driving. You have to keep driving. You'll never stop. You'll never escape." I didn't know how long I had been driving, hours, days, weeks, maybe. Time had lost all meaning. The darkness outside the truck was endless. The road was endless. I had become a part of it, a passenger on this never-ending journey. Then, as if it had been waiting for this moment, the truck slowed. I didn't want to stop, but the truck refused to move any faster. The headlights flickered, and I saw it, the sign. It wasn't a sign for a town. It wasn't a sign for a road or a gas station. It was just a single word, painted in faded white letters across an old, rusted board. Nowhere. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. The word seemed to burn itself into my mind. The truck came to a full stop, the engine stuttering and dying. I sat there, paralyzed, staring at the sign. And then I heard it. A voice, not from the radio, not from the air, but from somewhere within me. "You're here." I turned slowly, my body trembling as I glanced at the empty passenger seat. The man wasn't there, but I could feel his presence, just beyond the edge of my vision. The air around me grew thick again, oppressive, as if the world itself was closing in on me. The voice whispered again, this time colder, sharper. "You can never leave. You belong to the road. You belong to the endless night." I reached for the door handle, desperate to escape, but it wouldn't open. I tried again and again, but it was stuck. The windows wouldn't budge either. I was trapped inside, my body shaking with fear and helplessness. The truck started to move again, slowly at first, then faster, gaining speed as if the road itself was alive, pulling me forward. I could feel my heartbeat echoing in my chest, pounding in my ears. And as the truck sped down the road, I realized something that made my blood run cold. I wasn't driving anymore. I never had been. I was just another passenger on the road to nowhere. And as the truck rumbled through the darkness, I knew I would never stop driving. I would never escape. I would never be free. The truck surged forward once again, faster now, the road beneath it growing darker, more twisted, as though the very earth was unrecognizable. I was no longer sure where I was or who I was, nothing mattered anymore. The miles stretched out endlessly before me, stretching into a place where time and reality didn't seem to exist. I could still hear the voice in my mind. The voice that had been with me since the moment I'd stepped onto that road. It was growing louder, like a relentless drumbeat pounding in my head. "You are part of the cycle now," the voice whispered, as if trying to comfort me. "You will drive. You will always drive." I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg for mercy. But I couldn't. I was trapped in a world I could neither escape nor understand. The truck rattled as it picked up speed, the engine roaring in the silence of the night, and I couldn't look away from the road ahead. I couldn't. I knew that if I did, I would never return. If I stopped looking, the nightmare would swallow me whole. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, despite every ounce of me that begged me not to. But this time, there was something there. The man. His figure was no longer just a shadow, but a real, physical presence behind me. He sat in the back of the truck, his eyes glowing like white-hot embers. He smiled, and it wasn't the twisted, empty grin I had seen before. No. This one was satisfied. Pleased. "You thought you could escape," he said, his voice so cold it sent a shiver through me. "But you never really left. None of us leave. Not here." I tried to scream, to say anything, but my voice was gone. My mind was slipping, unraveling, caught in the same twisted web as the rest of the lost souls that haunted this road. There was no future. No past. Only this endless drive. The truck continued on, without pause, as though it had a mind of its own. But as I stared ahead, something shifted. I couldn't explain it, but something was changing. The darkness was thickening, the air more suffocating, as though the road itself was tightening around me, pulling me deeper into its grasp. And then I saw it. A figure up ahead, standing alone on the road, under a single, flickering streetlight. The same man, but this time, his eyes were completely empty, devoid of everything. There was nothing left but darkness in those eyes. The truck didn't slow down. It kept coming. I slammed my foot onto the brake pedal, but it didn't work. The truck wouldn't stop. The road wouldn't stop. Nothing would stop. As we neared the figure, the man's face contorted into something monstrous, something that didn't belong in any world I knew. His mouth opened wide, wider than a human's could possibly stretch, and from it, a sound, a roar, emitted, reverberating through the air and rattling my bones. I screamed, though I knew it wouldn't matter. The man wasn't real. He wasn't human. He was a part of the road. A part of the never-ending cycle. And as I came closer to him, I realized the terrifying truth: I was no longer in control. I never had been. The truck, the road, the man, they were all part of the same cursed, infinite loop. A trap. A never-ending, spiraling nightmare where the only way out was to give in. The truck didn't slow down. The headlights illuminated the figure, his face now twisted in agony, as the truck collided with him. And in that moment, I knew, that I had reached the end. There was no crash. No shattering glass. No broken bones. Just darkness. The roar of the truck's engine faded, and everything went silent. When I opened my eyes, I found myself back on the highway. The same stretch of road. The same endless, black asphalt. And behind me? The truck. The same headlights, the same voice. But this time, there was no road ahead. Only a sign. A faded, rusted sign hanging in the air. It read, "End of the road." And at the bottom, scrawled in red letters, "You will never leave." The truck rolled forward once more, and this time, there was no one behind the wheel. Just the road. And the cycle continued.